Without a doubt, right now, one thing is certain. These are tumultuous times, and societal tensions are nearly as high as any of us can remember. Perhaps some of you, of a certain age, having lived through the 1960s, with that decade's wars, cultural revolutions, violent protests, and assassinations, might think that today's tensions pale in comparison to the pains of those halcyon days. And in many ways, you would be right to think so. Yet, nevertheless, even the trials of the 1960s, when placed side by side with our current woes, seem almost quaint in the remembering. We are in the throes of a pandemic, the likes of which the world has not seen for more than 100 years. Societally, we are enduring a breakdown in Jewish-Christian morality reminiscent of ancient pagan Rome. And now, as if to add insult to injury, the U.S. faces one of the most heated election cycles ever. Oh, 2020, what more do you have to give us? And it is precisely about that election that we need to talk. Now, before you get nervous, fear not. I will not, emphatically not, be telling you what to do in the ballot box on November 3rd. This is not a partisan speech, and I will not take sides. It is not the place of a priest of the Catholic Church to tell you for whom you should vote. Theologically speaking, that is simply not our job, even if some high-profile clerics seem to think otherwise. It is, however, our job to assist you to form your consciences well in line with the moral teaching of the Catholic Church, which, since you're here in the heat at 9:45 a.m. on a Sunday morning during a global pandemic, instead of being home eating donuts, forward with regard to your voting decisions. I will do this by way of giving you three main principles that you can use to make your choice. Finally, a bit of a caveat. Sometimes, people mishear what priests say in homilies. In view of preventing any misunderstandings, I am reading this homily from a prepared text, and every word I say is written down. If you want a record of what I said, I am more than happy to give it to you. The first principle is that the Catholic moral theological tradition does not consider all moral matters to be equally important. Some matters are far more significant than others, and we need to take this into account in our voting decisions. In fact, as the Church's highest doctrinal office, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith writes in its document entitled The Declaration on Procured Abortion, and I quote, "The tradition of the Church has always held that human life must be protected and favored from the beginning, just as at the various stages of its development," end quote. As such, the question of procured abortion is the preeminent issue for our discernment with regard to voting because it directly attacks, quote, life itself, the most fundamental, good, and the condition of all others, end quote. Notice, however, that it is not just the bringing forth of life that must be protected, but also life at the various stages of its development. Thus, while it is essential that we combat procured abortion as a great evil, we also cannot forget that human life is worth protecting in all its stages. As Catholics, we are pro-life from conception all the way to natural death. As the bishops of the United States teach in their document entitled Forming Consciences, this focus on being pro-life from birth till death has certain repercussions. Since their teaching is altogether salient, I would like to quote it here in full. the threat of abortion remains our preeminent priority because it directly attacks life itself, because it takes place within the sanctuary of the family, and because of the number of lives destroyed. At the same time, we cannot dismiss or ignore other serious threats to human life and dignity, such as racism, the environmental crisis, poverty, and the death penalty." End quote. The second principle is the certain fact that both American political parties often support positions with which the Catholic Church cannot agree, and there is not one political party that is 100% acceptable in terms of the moral doctrine of the Catholic Church. Being Catholic cannot be seen to be identical with being either a Democrat or a Republican, even if some may certainly and justifiably argue that one party's official platform is more acceptable to the Catholic Church than the others in terms of certain issues, such as abortion and euthanasia. We are always Catholics first and partisans of political organizations second. Finally, the third principle is a guide to what this means practically in terms of our decision-making process with regard to voting. This final principle has been best expounded by the then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the one-time Pope Benedict XVI, while he was still prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in 2004. In a letter written to an American cardinal at that time, entitled "Worthiness to Receive Holy Communion, General Principles," Cardinal Ratzinger wrote the following helpful guidance, and I quote, "A Catholic would be guilty of formal cooperation in evil, and so unworthy to present himself for Holy Communion, if he were to deliberately vote for a candidate precisely because of the candidate's permissive stand on abortion and or euthanasia. When a Catholic does not share a candidate's stand in favor of abortion and or euthanasia, but votes for that candidate for other reasons, it is considered remote material cooperation, which can be permitted in the presence of proportionate reasons." End quote. As such, there is no doubt that the Church, 1, promotes the pro-life cause absolutely. 2, sees procured abortion and euthanasia as the preeminent issues for our consideration. And 3, expects that our voting choices will protect life from conception to natural death. However, it may also be the case that remote material cooperation with evil is allowable in the presence of proportionate reasons. Thus, ideally, we should always be able to vote for a pro-life candidate. But what could some of these proportionate reasons be which could potentially allow voting for a pro-choice candidate in spite of his or her problematic views, if one's conscience dictates that one cannot vote for an ostensibly pro-life candidate in an electoral situation such as ours in America, in which there are only 2 viable choices? I will not draw them out for you here in the specific, because if you believe such proportionate reasons exist, that is your job now. These are objective criteria, there is no doubt. At the same time, our subjective adjudication of these objective criteria is what occurs in the interiority of each person's own conscience. So in summary, while it is necessary that we try to protect human life at all stages of its development, and our voting choices must reflect this, at the same time, we are permitted to choose between very imperfect candidates and to vote for one or the other in spite of certain positions they might hold, if there are proportionate reasons for us to do so. Moreover, We can also justly choose to vote for neither candidate if our well-formed consciences dictate that neither candidate is worthy of our vote. While we consider these matters, however, we must always remember that abortion and euthanasia are tremendous moral evils that must take precedence in our discernment. May God bless you in your discernment. May he enlighten and inform your consciences, and may he bring us all through this time of great difficulty and grant us his peace. Let us stand and profess our faith.